Good evening, everybody. This is Health Reframed, and my name is Jack Snyder. Today, we got a great topic. We're going to talk about sleep. Now, I've talked about sleep in many of my episodes before, and for good reason. Sleep affects pretty much every aspect of health. Now, this thing that we call sleep, what is it? We're going to look into that today, and each of us sleeps every single day of our lives, for the most part, so learning how to effectively sleep and the best habits for sleep and in and around sleep is going to be really helpful for us today. It's an integral part of our life that we can sometimes forget because it is so routine. However, it is a strange thing that we do when we mystically lose our consciousness for literally a third of our lives. So let's get into it. Like I said, my name is Jack Snyder. I am a prospective doctor and I am applying to med school this year. And I have a degree in biomedical sciences with a concentration in anatomy and physiology. So without further ado, let's get right into it. And one more thing before we get going, the vast majority of you who listen to the show, be it on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you listen, aren't actually subscribed. If you could subscribe to the channel, that would mean so very much to me. It helps out a lot, and I appreciate it. Thank you. So, before we get into the nitty-gritty of sleep, I think it's going to be pertinent for us today to talk about why we sleep in the first place. And as with many things in biology, there are a lot of theories here. And there's not one clear answer, but there are a few theories that I think are incredibly compelling. So the first idea is rooted in evolutionary biology. Oftentimes, evolution gives us a window into the function of something if we think about it from that point of view. So the idea here is that sleeping makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint, because if you spend a third of your time silent, not moving, and relatively well hidden, then you're less likely to be attacked and killed, which is going to be very beneficial for the proliferation of the species, which, if we remember, one of the core ideas of evolution is survival of the fittest and natural selection. The species that are most fit for the environment survive. They are naturally selected. And if you survive better because you are unconscious for a third of the time, this could be advantageous. The next idea, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is that the body repairs itself during sleep. From your brain down to your toes, a lot of stuff goes on when you sleep, and this gives a lot of intuitive sense to this idea, because when you're asleep, you often wake up feeling rested, and it can help with things like recovery, or if you are having a very mentally strenuous day, you wake up feeling very refreshed mentally as well. And this theory is supported by ample evidence that when you sleep, you do indeed repair muscle, synthesize proteins, release certain growth hormones, and all of this happens primarily when you sleep. And on the topic of rest and repair, sleep is incredibly important for energy conservation. This could kind of tie into the evolutionary side of things as well, but when you're asleep, you use far less energy. And again, this makes sense. You are not performing a lot of movements. You're not in situations that make you think very cognitively about things. Your brain uses a lot of energy, so putting it to rest a little bit saves a significant amount of energy. And this is very effective because saving energy will mean that you have more energy during the day to do important things and evolutionarily proliferate the species. And finally, sleep has been found to be incredibly important for neuroplasticity. In other words, when you are asleep, your brain works to structure and reorganize itself. And this will include processes like memory formation and forgetting unimportant information. You see a lot of things during the day. You see different colors of cars, you do different drives, you might go on an airplane, you might see a million faces, and these things aren't necessarily important, and it's advantageous to actually forget them so that you can have more room in your brain. And these are just a few theories as to why do we sleep, but I think they do a pretty good job of answering the question generally for our purposes today. And we sleep to give our brain time to rest, our brain and body time to rest, repair, and even build itself up. Sleep has a profound effect on how your other bodily systems perform as well, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So now for kind of the fun part, in my opinion, what happens when you sleep? What is sleep? So although the specifics of sleep and like how it happens and what it is have yet to be fully elucidated, we can understand some general things about sleep. And to start, let's start general here with the phases of sleep. This isn't the cellular level yet. This is just the broad picture of sleep. So sleep is a pretty dynamic process. It's not like you fall asleep and you're in this one state for 8 hours and then you're done and you wake up. It actually has a couple of stages or phases. And one of the ways that we characterize these stages is with an EEG, which is an electroencephalogram. This is when they put electrodes all over your head and record electrical activity coming from your brain when you're asleep. And there's specific waves associated with each stage of sleep, and that kind of correlates with function and the presentation of that stage. So we'll go more in depth during each stage, and let's go through them one by one. So the first stage is actually being awake, and this one is pretty self-explanatory. This is when you're conscious and when you're alert. However, there can be variability in this stage. For instance, being awake versus being awake with your eyes closed and sleepy, these are two different things on the ECG, or EEG rather. And when you're fully awake with your eyes open, the brain produces beta waves, which are high frequency and low amplitude. So they're going to be very, very busy, if you want to think of it like that. However, when you start to become sleepy at night, and especially when you close your eyes, your brain switches to alpha waves. The names aren't necessarily important here, but it is important that I think you remember some of them because it's going to come up later. Some of these waves actually repeat throughout the night during sleep, which is rather interesting and kind of important. So, besides being awake, the actual stages of sleep are split into two broad categories. So first we have REM sleep, which is rapid eye movement sleep, and then we have non-REM sleep. And in non-REM sleep, we have 3 stages, and REM is just 1 stage. So when you fall asleep, you start in non-rapid eye movement sleep. And this is going to be stage 1, NREM1, or just N1 for short. And this stage of sleep is incredibly short, around 1 to 5 minutes, and it's characterized by being very light sleep. It's the stage where you're easily woken up and has some characteristics of being awake, like having some muscle tone and regular breathing. And this stage is characterized by theta waves on the EEG. And after the very short N1 stage sleep, you go into N2, unsurprisingly. And this is a little bit of a deeper sleep, so your heart rate slows down, your body temperature begins to drop, and it also lasts a little bit longer, around 25 minutes on average. And this is where some of the functions of sleep starts to occur. Specifically, during stage N2 sleep, you start to consolidate memories. And the memory consolidation process is characterized by big bursts of electrical activity. These are called K complexes and sleep spindles, and you can actually see them on the EEG. It'll be a relatively unbusy line, if you want to think of it like that. And then you'll see a big burst of activity. And those big bursts are going to be either K complexes or sleep spindles. And these are associated with memory consolidation. And they are going to include areas of the brain like the insula, thalamus, superior temporal, and anterior cingulate gyri. And these powerful bursts are very important for memory consolidation that occurs here. Next up, we have N3 sleep. This is the deepest sleep that you will be in for the entire night, and it's characterized by delta waves. So these waves are very low and slow, so they don't have very high frequency, they're not very big, and they're very, very slow when you look at them on the EEG. And this is when you're very sound asleep. It's very hard to wake people up. And this is also the stage where if you're woken up from it, you will feel incredibly drowsy. I'm sure that many of you have been woken up from a very deep sleep before and you wake up feeling incredibly disoriented. This actually lines up with what studies have found, and this is a legitimate thing where after you're woken up from N3 sleep, there's a 30 to 60 minute window where you're incredibly tired, brain fog, and have difficult time functioning. And during this stage, functionally, your body is going to build and repair tissue, synthesize muscle, and build up the immune system so that it is a bit stronger. Bit of an aside here, but this is one of the reasons why sleep is so incredibly important when you're sick. When you're sick, your immune system is really doing all of the work for you. So if you can sleep and increase the amount of time that you're actually building up your immune system, you're going to get better a lot quicker. And this stage lasts longer still, around 30 minutes to an hour. Next up, we have REM sleep. This is everyone's favorite, and REM sleep is when your brain is doing rapid eye movement. So in REM sleep, your eyes are the only muscle that can move, so the muscles that move your eyes are able to move. So when you're in REM sleep, you're effectively looking around at the back of your eyelids. All the other muscles in your body are unable to function at this point, which is very good because REM sleep is when you dream. And when you dream, it would be very advantageous to not act out your dreams during the night. And REM is a bit of an anomaly here because it's not considered restful sleep necessarily. You're not rebuilding or repairing or doing memory consolidation or any of the other things that we talked about earlier. And in fact, the brain waves that are present during REM sleep are remarkably similar to the brain waves when you're awake. And this is, again, something that makes intuitive sense, I think, because when you're dreaming, although you're not fully conscious or aware of it, it does feel very similar to being awake. You're seeing things, you're having experiences, you're feeling emotions, and a lot of things are going on inside of your brain that feel very similar to being awake. So the first cycle of REM lasts around 10 minutes, but throughout the night in subsequent cycles, it gets considerably longer, up to an hour during the later cycles. And this might also explain why, for many people, myself included, you seem to dream more vividly and more in the morning hours. But what are cycles? We've mentioned this a couple of times. We have varying lengths. We have multiple cycles. But what is a cycle? So when you go to sleep, you will go through all of these stages in sequential order, N1, N2, N3, and then REM sleep. And then that lasts about 90 minutes on average. And after that, you'll go right back to N1, which is light sleep. And you'll oscillate through this cycle 4 to 6 times per night. And that pretty much covers the broad view of the sleep stages. We could go more in depth, but that covers the main points. And now that we've covered that, I think it's going to be important to cover something else that is vital for sleep, and that is the biological clock. Your body tries its best to stay in line with the 24-hour cycle of the days that we have here on Earth. And it does this due to Zeitgebers. Zeitgebers are external signals that your body receives that train your body to align its internal biological clock with the 24-hour day cycle. So let's explain this because big words, funny sounding words, Zeitgeber. The first Zeitgeber that we have, unsurprisingly, is light. Light is really important for your circadian rhythm, and the reason for this is because light comes into your eyes during the day at incredibly high amounts compared to night, and your body uses this information to align itself with the day and night cycle. And as we all know, we are not nocturnal, we sleep during the night, so when those light signals start to come down, then your body begins to align its circadian rhythm with the sleep cycle. You'll begin to feel sleepy when the light goes down, in other words. And this is your circadian rhythm, and here's how it works. Your eyes, specifically your retina, detects light coming in. That's what your eyes do. And this is sent to your brain. It's sent to a bunch of different locations. One of the locations is the occipital lobe. This is where that information is processed into visual information. This is the area that effectively tells your brain what you're seeing on a moment-to-moment basis. It goes to other areas for reflexes, so if something bright flashes in your peripheral vision, you'll orient to look at it just intuitively, instinctively, so it'll go to those places. And it also goes to an area of the brain that controls your internal clock. But beyond light, other important Zeitgebers are going to be food and hormones, as these also feed into the circadian clock of your brain. But what is this nebulous clock that we've been talking about? And thankfully, we know a decent amount about it, and we know the area. The area is going to be in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus controls many, many things. It's a very small part in the brain, around this big, I would say, and it's roughly in the middle of the brain. It is right behind your pituitary gland. Oftentimes, we hear the pituitary gland touted as the master gland of the body. It releases all of the hormones. It controls everything. This isn't entirely true because the hypothalamus actually ends up controlling the pituitary gland. So the hypothalamus, one of its functions, is the true master gland of your body. And specifically inside of the hypothalamus, the circadian rhythm and your internal clock is housed in what is called a nucleus. And a nucleus is simply a area of neural tissue that has a large amount of cell bodies. So in your brain, in your spine, and in all the nerves in your bodies, you have cells, and these cells are called neurons. So neurons are very interesting because they have a cell body, which is where information is processed, and then it has a very long process called an axon. And the axon is the part of the cell where information travels. So if you think inside of your head, I want to move my arm up, you send that information to your arm via an axon. And a nucleus is an area of cell bodies. And normally this means that some higher level processing is going on in that area. And this is indeed what happens. The nucleus that we're talking about here is called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And that's a big word, but effectively what it means is that it is above the nerves that go from your eyes to your brain. So the nerves that go from your eyes to the brain are the optic nerves. You have two of them, and when they go back, they cross and they form a chiasm. They meet, and this nucleus is right above that. So it makes sense because this is where some of the information from those nerves is headed to inform your circadian rhythm. This nucleus gets information directly from the eyes and uses that information to control the sleep-wake cycle. And one of the important ways that this system functions to help you sleep is by the release of melatonin. So once the lights start going down, the suprachiasmatic nucleus signals to another gland in your brain, which is going to be the pineal gland, to release melatonin. And melatonin makes you feel sleepy. Some of you may have taken melatonin supplements. And it's not just important for the circadian rhythm, but also for energy metabolism in the body. So these systems work to control sleep and wake cycles, but what other things are going on inside of your body physiologically when you're asleep? So the hypothalamus signals other parts of your brain when you're asleep. The brainstem is important because it tells the hypothalamus tells the brainstem to relax all of the muscles in your body. You'll recall that this is important because we don't want to be acting out our dreams. And the thalamus is also inhibited by the hypothalamus during sleep. And the thalamus is kind of like the switchboard of the brain. It connects everything coming in signal-wise from your body, sensations of touch, smell, taste, and so on, to the cortex of your brain. And the cortex is the area that processes this information and brings it to the front of your awareness. And in other words, it takes all these signals and it reduces them, which is important because it allows you to really not be aware of what's going on. You're receiving touch information, you're having sensations on your skin, you're hearing things perhaps at night, there might be smells, but the information just isn't reaching the cortical areas of your brain because the thalamus, which connects the two, is effectively turned off. And another part of your brain that's important is called the basal forebrain, and this simply promotes sleep and wakefulness in this context, and the midbrain, which helps us stay awake during the day. All of these structures do many other things, but in the context of sleep, this is their importance. And finally, I want to bring up adenosine, as we will touch on this a little bit later in regards to caffeine. Adenosine accumulates in the brain during the day and causes the sensation of drowsiness. And one of the reasons that it is thought that this is the case is because adenosine is a byproduct of ATP. ATP is adenosine triphosphate, and it is the energy currency of your body. So your body, when you eat, you have food, which you need for energy, but to turn a hamburger or a steak into energy that your body can use, it needs to make this chemical called ATP. And through a series of very complicated chemical reactions that go on inside of your body, it turns food into usable energy in the form of ATP. And your body uses ATP for practically everything from moving a muscle to performing cognitive brain functions to processing visual information and so on and so forth. It uses ATP for practically everything. And throughout the day, ATP is used inside of your brain and it gets broken down, or one of the ways it gets broken down is into adenosine. And if you think about it, more adenosine means more energy was used during the day and less energy is now available for you to use for the rest of the day, which causes you to feel sleepy because at night you're going to replenish those energy stores. And another important point about adenosine is that caffeine acts to block adenosine receptors inside of your nervous system. So adenosine accumulates in the brain and then it attaches to certain receptors in the brain that say, hey, there's a lot of adenosine here, which means we've used a lot of energy during the day and we should probably sleep. But what happens with caffeine is that it binds to those receptors and it doesn't tell anything to the brain. The brain just thinks everything is business as usual, that there's not a lot of adenosine, even though there might be a lot of adenosine floating around, but caffeine has just taken its place, which makes you feel more awake, even though you have still used a lot of ATP, or perhaps you have used a lot of ATP. And there's still a lot to learn in terms of sleep and why we do it. However, I think this gives us a good starting point to jump into the benefits of sleep and some of the sleep protocols on how we can sleep better. We could go very, very deep into the cellular biology, but I think for broad general advice, this covers most of the things that I think you guys should know. So next up, we're going to talk about the benefits of sleep, of which there are many. And as I mentioned at the start, I have mentioned sleep on pretty much every episode of this podcast. From Alzheimer's to gut health, sleep really affects every function in the body and how well your health is. And in my eyes, it's one of the 3 pillars of health, along with diet and exercise. Diet, exercise, and sleep really control the majority of your health. And the benefits of sleep are far and wide. Generally speaking, sleep is vital for cognitive function, mood regulation, immune system health, and cardiovascular health. Not to mention getting proper sleep can help, not getting proper sleep, can make certain conditions worse, like neurodegeneration, dementia, and even loneliness. And given what we've learned so far about sleep and what it does, this checks out. More than that, sleep also affects how you perform and behave while you are awake. You are also going to be better at solving problems and being more creative if you're more well-rested. Sleep is also vital for you to be alert, unsurprisingly, which is rather important. However, this can lead to issues in today's day and age with many jobs having demanding hours on workers. Shift workers and night workers suffer especially. Sleep makes you a lot moodier depending on how much sleep you've gotten. I found a study, this was kind of funny. One study found that people who are sleep deprived respond to low-level stressors in a similar way that people without sleep deprivation respond to large stressors. And in other words, small things piss you off when you are sleep deprived, which I think all of us have had examples of ourselves doing that or having someone else do it and us being there like, why are you so upset at this? It's one dish in the sink or something very minor. Why are you so upset? And one of the reasons could be that they might just be sleep deprived. And this basically means you're going to be more irritable and more emotionally sensitive if you haven't gotten sleep, which I don't think any of us want. Not getting enough sleep can also cause you to be more hungry during the day, and this can also increase the risk of other things like diabetes and obesity. And in a similar vein, sleep deficiency can cause high blood sugar, which is another risk factor for diabetes. And I could keep going, and I'm going to do a quick speed round here because there's so many things that sleep affect, so let's rattle them off just super quick here for you guys. Poor sleep raises the risk for heart disease, strokes, hypertension, fertility problems, problems during puberty, massive industrial accidents, depression, anxiety, and substance use. It can also negatively interfere with driving, social functioning, learning, reacting, and judging other people's emotions, to name a few. Sounds like the side effect list at the end of a medication commercial of a medication you probably shouldn't be on. All that aside, if you get good sleep, you will reap so many benefits and have so fewer problems in all of the domains I just mentioned, and probably still more. And I think we're all acquainted with the negatives. I think we've all had a bad night of sleep and suffered for it dramatically the following day. And I think we've all had really good nights of sleep where we wake up feeling refreshed and excellent and ready to tackle the day. And I think really that's what we all want when it comes down to it. So how do we do that? Adenosine, timing sleep cycles, blue light in general, phone across the room, consistency, tips. These are all things we're going to cover in this section just to kind of give you guys a little taste of what we're going to get into. So this is the good stuff. This is the ins and outs of good sleep. And let's get into what good sleep looks like, how much you need to sleep, and sleep timing, and so much more. So first, I do want to preface this by saying that adjusting sleep habits is far easier said than done. I know that personally I have had trouble with this in the past, especially during times like COVID when I had no responsibilities. I would actually fall asleep in the starting to not be wee hours of the morning, 5, 6 o'clock, and waking up in the afternoon. So I get it. It's hard. I've gone through it myself, but the benefits of working at it little by little, chipping away, making your habits and your sleep consistency and everything else a little bit better, the benefits are far and wide, and it is really, really worth it to put some effort into it. But I do understand it's hard, and I'm also going to talk about some ways to reframe this so that you can actually take small steps and make progress without it being as hard. First up, we need to talk about consistency. Many of us often fret far too much over how much sleep am I getting? Like, do I need 7 hours? Do I need 8, 9? Can I get by on less? that is important. We'll talk about it in a little bit, but what is far more important is how consistent your sleep is. And I found a study that actually compared the two. It was a very large study out of the UK by Wyndard and colleagues, and they found that sleep duration is associated with a 20 to 48 decreased risk of all-cause mortality. And these numbers were higher than for simply sleep duration. And let's see. So to put this into perspective, sleep consistency has been shown on some fronts to be more predictive of mortality risk than sleep duration. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is that when you sleep consistently, your benefits that you reap from sleep are going to be more than if you just sleep a set amount of hours per night. But what is consistent sleep? What does regular sleep look like? And it's pretty straightforward. It means that you're just going to be going to bed and waking up at around the same time every single day. However, this can be hard for a number of reasons. And one reason I think is that it can be very hard to fall asleep and wake up, the two tail ends of that. It can be hard to actually have your head hit the pillow and fall asleep right away, or hard to have an environment to where you're not distracted before you're falling asleep. And I want to talk about that one because I think sleep environment is absolutely crucial for good sleep, and it's something that's very hard nowadays in modern society. And the first couple things are going to be pretty straightforward, and then we'll get into the fun stuff. But having a dark environment is clearly important. Remember our whole discussion about light and how that signals to your brain. If you keep receiving light into your eyeballs, either from overhead lights or outdoor lights, if you live above the Arctic Circle or something like that, or your phone light, then you're basically signaling to your brain that, hey, there's still light out there, which means it's still daytime, which means we should still be awake. And there's a couple ways to do this. You can build your environment so that it's darker, so getting blackout curtains, turning all the lights off. And I personally use a sleep mask, like one of the eye covering ones, and that's been really, really great for me. And on the topic of light, I know that we all knew it was going to come to this. No screens before bed. We've all heard it a million times, and it's for very good reason. We all struggle with it. I struggle with it. I do get it. However, that light that comes from your phone, TV, or laptop is going to signal to your brain to keep you awake, which seriously disrupts your sleep cycle. You want to be able to hit your head to the pillow and fall asleep very quickly and not have your brain think that it's still daytime out. Not even to mention doom scrolling and how easy it is to just waste away hours doing that. Besides the blue light, if you sit down for 5 minutes and stare at your phone, that might not have a huge effect, but how often do we sit down for 5 minutes on our phone doom scrolling? It often becomes 30 minutes or an hour or 2 hours, and now you've not only eaten into the amount of time that you allotted to sleep, you've also made it significantly harder to fall asleep once you actually do put the phone down. And for this one, I think my personal advice here is that it's a lot easier to avoid your phone or screens than to resist it. And many of you probably don't want to hear this, but not having a TV in your room is going to be a good idea. It's going to be a lot easier to not turn the TV on if there's not a TV to turn on. And in terms of your cell phone, putting it outside of your room, not charging it in your room overnight, or I put it on the desk or outside of the room, both of these are incredibly effective at cutting down your screen time before you go to bed and when you wake up in the morning. And you might say, Jack, how am I going to wake up in the morning? I won't have an alarm clock. I use my phone to wake up. Well, you can buy an alarm clock. You can go to Goodwill, buy one used. They're very cheap. They're very affordable. And I think the benefits you'll reap long-term from not having disrupted sleep really mean that the alarm clock is going to pay for itself in a very short period of time. My alarm clock is one of the best decisions I made to purchase. I also have the one that does the sunrise effect. So in the mornings, if I want it to, it'll slowly turn on a light as I wake up, which is also good because you don't want light before you go to sleep, but you do want light when you wake up to signal to your body that it is time to wake up. So very similar to light, now that I've had my whole soapbox about cell phones and whatnot, is sound. So unsurprisingly, sounds at night can keep you awake. I have this issue myself. If you have roommates or people living above you and so on and so forth, it can be kind of annoying if you have loud people around you or cars or whatever it may be. And using things like white noise machines, fans, these help a lot. I also use earplugs at night. I have a whole sleep. I'm very particular with my sleep at this point. I use earplugs and a fan, so I kind of double up there. But any one of these, find one that works for you. and it might just help you sleep a little bit better. Next one is also a hard one. Next, I also understand it a lot, is caffeine. Caffeine could and probably will be a whole episode on its own, but to put it into this episode, we'll keep it pretty short. Caffeine later in the day interferes with your sleep. It blocks those adenosine receptors, as I mentioned earlier, and those adenosine receptors, actually having adenosine in them is important to make you feel sleepy. So if caffeine is still in there when you go to bed, you probably aren't going to feel sleepy, which is going to make it harder to fall asleep and have quality sleep. Even still, it's very difficult, and I understand that. So what are some general guidelines that we should follow? So not having caffeine at a minimum of 6 hours before your head hits the pillow is a good rule of thumb, I would say, but that is still a little bit up for debate. One study by Drake and colleagues found that even 6 hours before bed still had a significant impact on sleep. So ideally 8 hours or more if you can, but if you absolutely need it, again, night shift workers, I've been in your shoes before. Sometimes you just have to have the caffeine. If you're working at 3 a.m. in the morning, I totally understand. So 6 hours is going to be okay, 8 hours ideal, but if your situation calls for otherwise, I do understand as well. And let me see here. So I'm sure many of you also have had the caffeine crash early in the afternoon. So that's caffeine before bed. So what about caffeine in the morning? So caffeine in the morning, I know many of us, myself included, will wake up and first thing we do is get our coffee or pre-workout or caffeine pills or however you decide to consume caffeine. And it can actually be far more beneficial to wait a little bit for your morning coffee, because those adenosine, back to adenosine, adenosine just keeps coming up here. When you wake up in the morning, the adenosine is still bound to your receptors, which is one of the reasons you feel so groggy. But over time, it clears up and it clears out and you start to feel more awake. However, if you have caffeine right away, it'll lock onto those adenosine receptors and the adenosine won't be able to clear out. So you'll feel awake for the moment, but then later in the afternoon when the caffeine wears off and breaks off those receptors, the adenosine didn't have time to clear out, so it latches back onto those receptors and makes you feel very groggy in the afternoon. So ideally, 60 to 90 minutes after waking for your first dose of coffee, be it caffeine pills, coffee, energy drink, whatever, is going to be best. But I've found that even 30 minutes to 45 minutes can make a pretty significant difference. Another thing to look out for is alcohol and nicotine before bed, as they can interfere with quality sleep. Limiting naps during the day to under an hour is important too, because longer naps can disrupt your circadian rhythm, your normal sleep cycle. And then managing stress in certain ways like journaling, meditating, or doing calming activities is important too, because if you're stressed and unable to fall asleep because of it, that is also not ideal. However, if none of these work and you're still having trouble falling asleep, it's going to be best practice for you to actually get out of bed and do one of these relaxing activities for like 10 minutes or so, and then go back to bed, or not even 10 minutes, but just until you feel tired. And if that doesn't work, just rinse and repeat, because laying in bed, I found that laying in bed at night and being unable to fall asleep makes me stressed, which makes it harder to fall asleep. And then it just becomes this relentless cycle, but actually breaking the cycle and getting out of bed can help a lot. So next up here is sleep duration. This is such a hot topic, and I think there's reason for this. And I think the reason for this is because there's a range of ideal sleep durations for people. For instance, younger people need far more sleep. Infants can need up to 14 hours per day and are on a very different sleep schedule than someone in their 30s. And more than that, some people are just better equipped to deal with less amounts of sleep. Some people are able to be fully rested on less, where some people need more. And I think a good way to approach this is by starting with broad recommendations for yourself and then experimenting and finding out where your sweet spot is. So currently, what I found was that the general recommendation was around 7.5 hours of sleep. And the reason for this is because of sleep cycles. If you remember those from earlier, they're about 90 minutes, and you go through 4 to 6 of them per night. And in the middle there, that 5 number, 5 times 90, is going to equal 7.5 hours of sleep, which is where we get that number from. However, some people might only need 4 cycles, so that would be 6 hours of sleep. And then some people might need 6 cycles, which would be 9 hours. So I would experiment with it a little bit in your own life, because your sleep cycles might not be exactly 90 minutes on the dot, and you might need more and you might need less. So figure it out for yourself. Start with that 7.5 number would be my recommendation, and then try different durations and see what makes you feel most rested. And kind of in that similar vein, another thing that helps a lot here is timing your sleep cycles. So you're going to be best equipped to wake up in light sleep, that N1 stage that we talked about from earlier, because this is when you're just lightly asleep. And if you're woken up, it's not going to be as jarring as if you're in REM sleep or deep sleep. Either of those will make you feeling a little groggy waking up. And another good practice for sleep is actually physical activity. Physical activity is going to wear you out during the day. So that means you'll have more of a physical impetus to be sleepy. Your body will literally be tired, and that should help you fall asleep as well. Other minor factors that are going to help sleep is sleeping in a slightly cooler environment, stretching before bed, only using your bedroom for sleep, and having good mattresses and pillows, and not letting pets sleep with you. And again, I understand all of those and how difficult they can be. So small changes are going to be important here. And that's what I want to talk about next, because all of these sleep protocols and practices are really a moot point if you're not able to implement them in the first place. So how are you going to implement them? What are some of the best frame shifts for that? And the first one, I think, is to leave perfectionism and egoism at the door. It might be tempting in this space, this health space, to hear these protocols and be like, okay, I'm going to follow every single thing that this person says, and I'm going to have the perfect sleep routine. And that's great. And many people will try this and they might get through a week of it, and then they fall off the wagon because they're adding so many changes to their life all at once. It's very hard to break a habit, because when you're starting a new habit, a lot of the difficulty comes from breaking the old habit. Some nights also, you might not want to have good sleep. You might want to do other things that are valuable, socializing, work, or studying, to name a few. And some mornings, you might just want to go straight for the coffee. You might work out in the mornings. I do that as well sometimes, and go straight for the coffee, go to the gym so you can feel amped up. There are reasons to not follow these protocols to a T every time. And missing the mark here and there, it's not going to ruin your whole sleep program. You just need to hit the mark and stay diligent and hit it more than you miss. And if you do this, if you hit your sleep goals more than you fail at your sleep goals, I think you're going to be about 95% of the way there in terms of work. And it's also important to realize that habit change, especially with sleep, is very challenging. We have to break the old habits first, like I said. And old habits are best broken slowly over time, not all at once. It's a lot harder to do a complete 180 about face with a habit than it is to slowly tweak it and chip away at it over time. Let's take sleep consistency, for example. If you're like me and you often have to wake up and go to bed at different times throughout the week, it can be very challenging. So instead of setting an unrealistic goal, like I'm going to go to bed at 9:30 on the dot every night, and I'm going to wake up at 6:30 on the dot every morning, perhaps you give yourself a window. So instead of waking up at 6:30 a.m., you give yourself between 6 and 7 a.m. to wake up, just to make it a little bit easier. And if you want to wake up at 9 every day, if you wake up at 9 every day, and ideally you'd like to wake up at 7, you could also try just bumping that time back a little bit. So instead of waking up at 9, you could wake up at 8:45 the next day. And then the day after that, you could wake up at 8:30, and so on and so forth. The point is here that you're going to give yourself really, really small goals that are really, really easy to reach, because in that way, they're not going to feel like these huge hurdles that you have to overcome. And this, if you do stick with this, it tends to snowball over time. So if you start doing the little improvements, then you gain confidence very, very rapidly, and you can actually start to take bigger steps. But I've also found that it's important to not take huge steps. You start gaining this confidence at the start, making the small wins, and then you take a huge step, and then you go right back to where you started. So keeping it sequentially growing and growing and growing, and letting the snowball effect take effect in a reasonable way. Small investments can help here too. Like I said, I use a sleep mask and earplugs, and I found them to be so incredibly beneficial for my sleep. I sleep significantly better for them, and they were maybe a combined total of $10. So incredible investment. And I've talked about this on the show before. Health is broad and has to be approached in a holistic way. Because of this, whenever you are trying to hone in on improving certain areas of health, it's important to keep the bigger picture in mind and keep that at the forefront of your attention, as it gives you a goal to move towards. If you have no goal to improve your sleep, it's going to be very difficult. And I think the important reframe that this causes is by thinking of sleep in a similar way that you might think about exercise or eating more vegetables. Sleep is a powerful tool that we all do every single day. And honing it in is like the equivalent of taking a powerful medication every day that improves every facet of your life. Imagine there was a box that you could sit into or a pill that you could take that it stole 7 hours of your time, but in return, it improved every aspect of health. It made you mentally sharper, it improved your creativity, and it made you feel incredibly better every single day. I think we'd all take that pill. And that pill does exist. It's just sleep. And fostering good habits to make sure you have the highest quality sleep is going to give you all of those benefits and be so worth it in the long term. Finally, I promised I'd break down a couple myths. So here's some sleep myths that are pretty common that I want to just debunk real quick. So you can get by on little sleep. This is the first one. This is not true. We pretty much shattered this one. Sure, some people need less sleep than others, but in general, we all need a decent amount of sleep, and getting sleep is very important. So sleep is not a bad thing. You need sleep, and sleep is good. And thinking that you'll sleep when you're dead, that's just not a good idea. Next one is alcohol helps with sleep. So alcohol, it's kind of true, but mostly not. Alcohol might get you a little bit more deep sleep and help you fall asleep quicker, but overall, for your whole sleep and all the cycles, it severely disrupts REM sleep and other stages of sleep. And because of this, you're going to have more light sleep in the morning as well and less REM. And this is just going to cause you to wake up more, get less total sleep, and not feel very rested. So you might fall asleep quicker, but overall, it's not very good. Next one is naps. Naps are exist on two ends of the spectrum. Some people treat naps like they're a godsend and they're the thing that everyone needs to do to instantly double their productivity. And some people treat naps like they're a pure waste of time and totally awful and horrible. Neither end of the spectrum is particularly true. Naps can be very helpful. The trick here is to tailor them so that they aren't a waste of time and that they actually do give you some rest and some extra energy for the day. And this normally means taking shorter naps. So 20 to 30 minutes is going to be the power nap zone. And this is really beneficial because it can help you feel significantly more rested and refreshed to take on the rest of the day. The important part is to not let that dip into longer periods of time, like 1, 2, 3+ hours, because then you are just effectively throwing time away. Next one is you can restore sleep debt by sleeping on weekends. So sleep debt refers to the total amount of sleep you missed during a week. So let's say for you need 7.5 hours of sleep per night. And for 7 days in a row, you only got 6.5 hours of sleep. So in this instance, you'd have 7 hours of sleep debt. And the idea here is that you can repay this sleep debt by sleeping more on weekends and just sleeping for, 5 extra hours in the night, and then you regain some of that. Now, there's not much evidence here that sleeping in on the weekends will reverse the negative effects of this, because having constant sleep debt over time is going to have all of the negative downsides of not having enough sleep. Sleeping in and naps can help in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to be best to just have a good sleep schedule most nights or every night, and not trying to constantly being in this cycle of catching up on sleep. Next one, more sleep is always better. Like we talked about earlier, there's generally a sweet spot for most people, and most people are going to need a little bit different amounts of sleep, but most of the time this is going to be around that 7.5 hour mark. I did actually find a study that showed a correlation between long sleepers, so people who sleep very, very long during the night, so 9+, 10+ hours, and they associated that with all-cause mortality. Though this could be just mere correlation, but more than that, I think generally you don't need more sleep is the important part. So last one, your brain is not active during sleep. Again, per our previous discussion, your brain is doing a whole lot of things when you're asleep. It's repairing itself, it's consolidating memories, and you're dreaming, which is functionally in your brain very, very similar to being awake. So that's sleep, guys. Let's wrap things up here. Sleep isn't just a passive state where we shut down for the night. It's one of the most vital biological processes that we have, playing a foundational role in memory consolidation, emotional regulation, immune function, and physical recovery. We've explored a lot of the fascinating inner workings of the brain and the body during sleep stages, circadian rhythm, and some of the cellular aspects of sleep as well, and the neurobiology. And we've also gone into the consequences of what happens when you don't get good sleep, and some of the evidence-based strategies to improve sleep quality, and we've even debunked some common myths along the way. And if there's just one takeaway from this episode, if there's one thing for y'all to remember, it's that prioritizing good sleep isn't a luxury or a nice to have. It's really a necessity for your health. Just like nutrition and exercise, good sleep hygiene is a core pillar of long-term health, performance, and mental clarity. So whether you're a night owl, shift worker, or just someone trying to make healthier choices, the small changes that you implement over time to your sleep can ripple out into nearly every area of your life and improve every aspect of health. So thank you all for tuning in. Stay well, stay curious, and I'll see you all for the next episode. Peace.